Chapter 64, Time and Tide. Time and Tide. Frithia moved swiftly through the darkened arena, Joaquin's promenade empty now and rather eerie for it, all the stalls packed away for another day, while the circus tent loomed out of the darkness, a bright pavilion of life and light in the deepening twilight. The sounds of laughter and applause were echoing about the arena, the scores of windows that were set in the high-tiered walls glowing softly, stretching up to the glittering sky as though the stars were falling to earth. Frithia had reached the northeastern end of the promenade by now, the newly rebuilt tower and its shiny copper dome a dark silhouette against the deep blue sky. She did not linger to look at it though, passing quickly to trip up the nearby steps to the first wide terrace, 6 bright windows set into the warm sandstone frontage, the dark red sign above the door proclaiming the myth rest in ornate gilded letters. Frithia paused, suddenly wishing she were instead stood before the familiar peeling door of the coronet, or even back at her theatre. A whole evening of polite questions and awkward answers seemed to stretch before her, where she would be forced to play another role from her rapidly expanding repertoire, Frithia, the demure young lady. She sighed, slipping off her coat to fold it over her arm, her eyes drifting over the simple yellow dress she was wearing, narrow-sleeved and full-skirted, her own amber sash now opened out and tied tightly under her bust to form an elaborate bow at her back. Well, at least she looked the part. If truth be told, she had regretted telling Anomen she would attend almost as soon as the words had left her mouth, her hopes that she would change her mind as the day progressed all coming to naught. Frithia frowned, instantly cross with herself. She would have usually been delighted to have been invited to such a gathering, with its promises of music and dancing, but it had come at the wrong time, with Renal's betrayal and her own group's previous displeasure still hanging over her, and she just felt melancholy and out of sorts. She knew as well, though, that it had been very kind of Simon to invite her, just as it was kind of the girls at the theatre to lend her clothes and dress her hair, and she could not change her mind now. Frithia drew a deep breath and released it slowly, nipping at her cheeks to raise a healthy blush and straightening her sash before she at last pushed open the door. She did not spot them immediately, her eyes scanning the colorful chaos of people before they finally came to rest on Simon's honey-color head. The squire was sat talking with Anomen, Eric, and 2 other men of Amnian coloring who she did not recognize, one round-faced, an untidy mop of dark curls falling about it, while his taller companion was rather elven in his features, though he was most definitely human, all high cheeks and sharp chin. Simon glanced back at her approach and suddenly the 5 men were all on their feet, Frithia feeling even smaller as she arrived at their table, Simon perhaps sensing her reluctance as he stepped forward to take her hand and lead her in graciously.
"Frithia, you look lovely, tell her how nice she looks, Anomen." "Frithia, Eric, you're all over here,"
interrupted a deep voice, Frithia turning to see a man stood behind her, tall and rather square of face, his black curly hair cropped close to his head.
"And this must be the Lady Frithia,"
he continued, glancing down to her with a smile.
"Simon here has been singing your praises since breakfast."
Frithia felt instantly caught out, glancing back at the now grinning squire as she hastened to refute the claims.
"Oh, Simon is too generous in his compliments."
The man's smile broadened.
"Usually I would agree with you, but this time I think he has been right on the mark."
He took her hand politely.
"I am Dice Felt, m'lady, and this is my sister, Elsenda."
He stepped aside to reveal a timid-looking girl in a gown of deep green velvet that put Frithia in mind of some sort of opulent moss. She seemed a few years younger than herself, with rather hooded eyes and the same dark hair as her brother, though the length had tamed the curls somewhat, neat waves rippling to just past her shoulders. She looked about as uncomfortable as Frithia felt, the pair of them bobbing a curtsy in unison and mumbling, "Well met." Simon smiled, stepping back to continue with the introductions.
"Lady Frithia and Lady Elsenda, this is Sir Tristan and Sir Marcin."
The 2 men nodded, Frithla only just given time to bob her curtsy when yet more people arrived behind her and she felt rather like she was drowning in that sea of smiling strangers.
"Oh, and here are two more of our company,"
announced Simon genially.
"Ladies, these fine gentlemen, and fellow squires, are William and Aidan."
Frithla turned to greet two men of barely 18, the former tanned and blonde and looking rather like Simon's younger brother, while the latter was more slight in his build with floppy black hair and a rather weak chin, a pretty girl of no more than 17 summers at his side. Simon took her hand.
"And this must be the Lady Bridget. Aidan speaks of you constantly, my lady."
The brown-haired girl giggled behind her hand, ringlets trembling, William smiling as he pulled out a chair for her.
"Ah, Simon, will you never tire of being so vilely charming? Oh, and Satyr asked us to tell you that he will be along later. I left him grooming Sir Gethin's horse."
Simon nodded pompously.
"Ah, I am glad to hear it. Some of these squires are getting ideas far above their ranks and need to be humbled with more mundane tasks. Right,"
he continued with a grin,
"I think we are going to need some more chairs."
And men were suddenly all bustling about her, moving chairs and pulling the nearest table closer so they could all sit together. Frithla stood with Elsenda and Bridget feeling rather helpless and silly, and she was glad when Simon appeared at her shoulder.
"Here, Elsenda dear, have this seat next to your brother. And Frithla, please take my chair."
Frithla sank gratefully down next to a gnomon, the knight sending her an apologetic look in the cover of this surrounding activity.
"Your pardon, Frithla, had I known it would be like this, I would have met you at the theatre."
Frithla forced a smile, shaking her head.
"It's fine, a gnomon, I'm just a little overwhelmed is all these names and faces, but it's fine, I'm fine."
A gnomon frowned, though Eric forestalled whatever he had been about to say, the paladin smiling as he watched Simon directing the chaos.
"Look at him, the man is in his element. But how have you been, my lady? The last time we spoke, I fear we parted in less than favorable circumstances."
Eric dropped his voice slightly, his look grave.
"Did you have any troubles from those creatures?" "Yes, but I am pleased to say they have passed, at least for now." "That is good to hear, my lady. Oh, and Hugo has arrived, Sir Hugo."
Everyone had just got seated, but the men all stood again as another knight and his lady arrived at the table and Frithla rather hoped she was the last of them. All these ups and downs were making her dizzy. Simon was shaking hands with Sir Hugo, the knight quite a bit older than the rest of them, probably his late 30s by his appearance, his face ruddy beneath his thinning brown hair, as one who spends much time out of doors. His wife, Diorna, was of a much darker cast, olive skin just beginning to line about her eyes and mouth the only hint to her years, her black hair tidied away in a gold net set with pearls that picked up the golden accents on her deep red gown, the woman smiling regally as Simon bowed and kissed her hand. And, at last, the three sat, prompting another round of introductions which Frithla was rather glad of, the girl appreciating the opportunity to be reminded of everyone's names.
"Right,"
said Hugo, clapping his hands together enthusiastically with the air of a man who was used to taking charge.
"Shall we get some drinks ordered?"
Simon nodded.
"I heard from one of the maids that they've a new batch of cocoa in, the boat from Majdaka docked just this morning." "Oh, can we?"
cried Bridget, turning at once to her dark-haired sweetheart.
"I should love to try some."
"Well," Aidan faltered, looking rather caught out, and Frithla was pretty sure she knew from where his hesitation stemmed. Anything that had to be imported from halfway across Dareel was unlikely to be cheap, and she doubted the squires of order were left with much in the way of allowance once their necessities were paid for.
"Of course,"
interrupted Simon, instantly catching the eye of a passing maid and subtly slipping more than enough coin for all of them onto her tray.
Can we have a pot of cocoa here please, miss? Enough for...
He paused to count them quickly.
13 of us.
The girl bobbed a curtsy and hurried off.
So under what occasion are we gathered here, Simon?
Asked Diorna, turning that majestic smile upon the squire once more, and Fritha thought it looked rather affected up close.
An occasion?
He repeated with a genial surprise.
Goodness, do we need one?
A round of polite laughter, Diorna smiling fondly as she continued.
Ah, Simon, you always were such a card. I was speaking to your mother just the other day. She tells me your sisters are doing well. Are neither of them out with you tonight? Ah, no, my lady, my father feels that they are still perhaps a little young. A pity, such nice girls, and they would have certainly evened up the numbers. But it is nice to see you out, Elsenda dear. We missed you at young Lydia's presentation.
The girl made no reply, though the flush to her cheeks said more than enough.
I fear we were otherwise engaged that evening,
explained Dysfeld promptly, Diorna nodding graciously as she turned her attention to Fritha.
And I do not believe we have met, my dear. No, the Lady Fritha is new to the city and to our company,
provided Eric with a kind smile to the girl in question.
I see. They introduced you as a friend of Sir Enomen's, yes? And what is it that brings you to our fair city?
Fritha took a moment to answer her, trying to find the best way to phrase her reply.
Well, I suppose you could say I am here on business. Business? And what is it you do, my dear? Well, I don't really have a trade per se,
she stalled, not really wanting to start the evening off on a falsehood. A mild frown was creasing Diorna's brow, the woman clearly about to press for further clarification on this, though she did not have the chance.
The Lady Fritha is always too modest,
cut in Simon with an easy grin.
I noticed she neglects to mention the fact she owns the playhouse on the bridge. Truly,
cried Elsenda, the first time she had spoken since they had sat down, and none looked more surprised than she, the girl suddenly rigid in her chair as Fritha nodded mildly.
Yes, you are interested in the theatre. Yes, a little,
the girl mumbled to the table, already blushing fiercely.
Come now, Elsenda,
Dysfeld reproached gently.
My sister has always been a most ardent enthusiast of the theatre, my lady.
Fritha smiled kindly, still trying to catch her eye.
I can arrange for some tickets to be sent to you and your brother for the opening night, if you would like. You can even come backstage and meet the cast.
Elsenda glanced up at her offer, seeming to struggle a moment with her shyness before she was smiling, albeit tentatively.
Yes, thank you, I should like that very much.
Dysfeld beamed.
Ah, and here we are,
announced Simon as the maid arrived at his side with a tall pot and a tray of cups.
Thank you, miss.
There was a lull over the table as the girl moved around them all, passing out cups and pouring out the steaming cocoa. Fritha eyed the cup before her, a fine white porcelain with a handle so small and ornate it seemed to be more for decoration than any real use. Indeed, the men had all ignored them in favor, taking their cups casually about the bowl. Fortunate really, since the mere thought of a dozen burly knights genteelly balancing their cups betwixt thumb and finger was enough to send Fritha scarlet with suppressed laughter, though she had noticed the few women around her were doing just that, and her amusement faded soon enough, all her concentration on lifting her cup without dropping it neatly into her lap. The liquid within was dark and unervingly opaque, rather like it had just been scooped from a muddy puddle, though the smell more than made up for the appearance, and Fritha found herself quite disappointed as she took that first sip. The taste was bitter and overly milky, a sickly sweetness rushing up as she continued to drink, lingering at the bottom of the cup where the sugar had been added, and Fritha released belatedly. She probably should have given it a stir before she began.
"And how do you like it then, Lady Bridget?"
asked Eric genially. The girl took another sip, smoothing her lips together thoughtfully.
"It is bitter, but in the same instant sweet. Like love,"
Fritha quipped absently into her cup, glancing up as a ripple of polite laughter traveled the table.
"Oh, Anomen,"
chuckled Diorna,
"your friend is quite the delight. How did the two of you meet?"
Anomen glanced to her, looking uncertain and more than a little concerned, and Fritha was rather touched. He understood she might feel awkward, though there was nothing they could really do. She shrugged imperceptibly to him. The truth will out, as the sages said, the pair of them turning back to Diorna for Fritha to answer.
"I am part of the same mercenary company as Anomen."
The woman raised a well-plucked eyebrow.
"Oh, I see, a soldier and an actress. You are a young woman of many talents. Are you hoping to gain entrance to the order as our Anomen has?"
Fritha swallowed. The conversation was taking a route she would have rather avoided.
"Ah, well, no. I just need to raise some coin." "Coin?"
came Bridget innocently, and Fritha suspected she had never had to earn the stuff.
"Why, whatever for?"
Fritha placed a serene smile over her discomfited heart.
"Well, they say a girl can never have too many gowns."
More polite laughter, Simon glancing back sharply at the sound of the door.
"Hosadur, over here!"
he called, perhaps a little more enthusiastically than was strictly needed, the squire standing to welcome his friend and present him to the table. He was a handsome young man of about Simon's age and of Calamshite descent, his skin close in color to the cocoa that still lingered in her cup, the man's dark eyes gleaming in the lamplight, and Fritha noticed both Bridget and even Diorna straightened slightly under the broad smile as the introductions passed to them. Anomen sent her a wary glance under this distraction, still something of the anxious to his eyes, and Fritha smiled, puffing out her cheeks slightly and exhaling in a hint at the relief she felt. The knight grinned, looking unexpectedly pleased, the gesture lingering as he turned back to the table. And there was much there to keep him smiling, Simon and Sadur keeping the table entertained between them, the pair a foil to one another's wit, and it was not long after that the musicians struck up and the tables all but cleared, those with partners taking their places on the floor, while those without lined the edges in pairs and small groups to watch and converse. Fritha did not much feel like dancing that night though, and after the first few rounds she and the similarly reluctant Elsenda had stolen away and secured a place on the edge of the floor, half hidden behind a pedestal and the feathery-leaved potted fern atop it, the girls talking politely about the dances and the number of couples. That was until but moment ago, when Sir Tristan had arrived to ask for a dance. Elsenda led away to the floor looking stricken. Fritha smiled, watching the girl, rigid in her posture as she moved through the steps of the brandsel they were playing, her eyes fixed on some point just above Tristan's left ear and ignoring the man's valiant attempts at conversation. The tavern was busy, and Fritha felt quite invisible, stood there watching the couples about the room dance and talk, the subtle flirtations, the unspoken rivalries, the girl rather enjoying her evening as a blossoming little wallflower, though it seemed she was not to be alone for much longer. Anomen had either been looking for her, or had perhaps just noticed Elsenda's departure, the man spotting her alone and excusing himself from Sir Marcine's company on the opposite side of the room to move towards her, stopping only to collect some drinks from the tray the maid had just arrived with, the man passing her a cup of wine with a smile as he arrived.
"Are you enjoying your evening, my lady?" "It has been pleasant enough so far."
He raised an eyebrow, clearly hearing this stiffly formal echo of his customary response. Fritha grinned at him, and together they laughed.
"Ah, Anomen, I would not have thought to see you in the midst of such merriment."
Anomen turned, seemingly confused himself, stepping back to reveal a tall fair-haired man with dark narrow eyes who Fritha found strangely familiar.
Caudrel!
Exclaimed a Nomen.
Why, indeed, a Nomen,
the man confirmed smoothly,
you look surprised. Sir Raoul and I met the Lady Irlina as she and her friends were leaving the order and she invited us along as well. And who is this?
He continued, turning to her with measured smile, you must introduce me.
Caudrel, this is the Lady Fritha of Candlekeep,
a Nomen announced importantly, his eyes fixed on the knight. Fritha raised an eyebrow slightly at this rather formal introduction, but said nothing.
Fritha, this is Sir Caudrel.
Caudrel smiled, scooping up her hand and placing a kiss upon the back with a practiced movement that made it seem more perfunctory than attentive.
My lady, it is such a pleasure to finally meet you, after having heard you spoken of so much, and so highly too. My thanks, Sir Caudrel, though please call me Fritha.
She smiled and Caudrel watched her in silence for a moment before returning it, the first genuine sentiment Fritha felt she had witnessed from him.
If you will but call me Caudrel, m'lady,
he continued amiably, seemingly much more himself as he released her hand,
indeed, though the first instance we have met, this is not the first time I have seen you. I believe it was about a month ago now, you were calling to a Nomen here from a window of an inn over in the slums.
Fritha beamed, finally placing the man.
Oh, yes. It was you a Nomen was speaking to, was it? Oh, you should have heard the telling off I got for that.
She laughed brightly, glancing to the man at her side.
What was it you called me, a Nomen? An old fishwife.
A Nomen said nothing, his posture suddenly stiff. Caudrel raised an eyebrow, smiling as he turned back to Fritha.
Ah, well, a Nomen has always enjoyed a reputation about the order as man of charm. And, of course, you know Lady Irlina,
a Nomen interrupted through gritted teeth as the pretty young woman herself appeared at his side in a pale yellow gown that brought out the gold in her hair, Simon at her arm.
It is a pleasure to see you as always, my lady.
The young paladin smiled warmly.
A good evening to you also, a Nomen, and the Lady Fritha is here as well,
she greeted, stepping forward to take both her hands in her own.
How lovely it is to meet with you once more.
Fritha beamed.
Irlina, it is nice to see you too, I didn't know you would be coming. Of course, what lady could resist an invitation from the Squire Simon?
Irlina smiled, the man himself looking rather pleased by their teasing as the two girls giggled merrily.
In fact, might I borrow you a moment, Fritha?
Irlina continued, glancing politely to the men surrounding her as though she expected them to protest.
I believe we have a mutual acquaintance of whom I should like to ask you.
Fritha nodded, clearly bewildered as the woman linked an arm through hers. And a Nomen watched as the young paladin led her away to the far corner, away from the dancers and the tables to talk, Fritha hiding an astounded smile behind a hand as Irlina chattered earnestly at her ear, before the three men seemed to realize as one that not one of them had spoken since the girls had left, Simon the first to break the silence.
Well, that was all very curious. I wonder what secret has so enthralled them both.
He considered aloud before clearly deeming it none of his concern, the man shaking himself and turning back to continue carelessly.
Well, don't let us keep you, Caudrel.
Caudrel sent the shorter man a cool look but took the hint, nodding curtly as he, too, took his leave. Simon sighed tersely, turning back to a Nomen with a frown.
What is he doing here? He said Irlina invited him.
The pair glanced back to the two women, both poring over a small square of parchment, pink as they giggled lightly.
Ah, I recognize that look,
said Simon turning back to send him a wise nod.
A love letter. Well, at least someone has got his act together. And what is that supposed to mean?
A noman demanded archly. Simon sent him a stern frown.
This is the first time you have spoken to Fritha all evening. No,
he began, though Simon would not let him finish the defense.
You know what I speak of, a noman. You complimented every lady of our company with some gesture or another, except for her. I most certainly have. No,
Simon interrupted again with a maddeningly calm air.
You have shown her friendship, which is very important, I agree, but it does nothing to impart to her the depth of the feelings you hold. I understand it is difficult, that it feels awkward when you are already friends, and that Fritha will likely find it all very bemusing in the outset, but she will not know until you show her.
Simon sighed, turning back to them, the two women now joined by Elsenda and Tristan.
Look at her, so bright and amiable. I haven't seen Elsenda talking so much to anyone outside her own family.
A noman glanced to them, Tristan now talking with Irlina, while the two girls watched the dancers in reserved silence. He turned back to Simon with a pointed look which his friend ignored.
A noman, Fritha is a nice girl, she deserves to be courted properly, and if you won't, I have no doubt that someone else will before long.
And with that Simon turned to leave as well, joining those in the far corner. The whole group lost to laughter, but a moment later an Anoman wished, and not for the first time in his life, that he could be as gregarious as his friend. Ari stood staring blankly at the ghostly outline of a girl she almost didn't recognize reflected in the black glass before her, the lamplight of the room making the night outside the window all the blacker, and she imagined Fritha somewhere out in that darkened city, in a tavern warm with laughter, a whole world away. Behind her, Ari heard Herr Dallas shut the door, and she turned from the window to sink onto the bed, the covers still crumpled from where they had slept the day away. They had stayed at the table for longer than she would have expected him to wish to be surrounded by the mild talk of the others. Ari sat, letting their voices drift around her in inharmonious song as she pushed the food about her dish. But at last he had suggested they retire, and there they were, Herr Dallas flitting, moth-like and erratic, about her room, stoking the fire and drawing the curtains, while she sat motionless on the bed. They had not long left. The fact they had slept all day had been the only way she had managed to get through it. Lain in perpetual dusk of that room, curtains drawn against the world, her own mind hovering in the twilight between sleep and waking, because despite what Herr Dallas had promised that morning, despite the pain she felt when she considered what would have to be done, in her heart of hearts Ari had at last given up. Herr Dallas had paused at the window, curtain in hand, and he made to draw them, the man gazing out over the darkened city as she just had.
Ah, I feel better for our sleep, but I wonder now if we will merely find that rest eludes us later. If you are the same, perhaps we can walk out for a bit, the night air might do us good. Ari.
He corrected hastily, glancing back to check on her reaction to this slip, their argument still fresh in his mind it seemed. Ari said nothing though, running a distracted finger over the fraying embroidery at her cuff. The meal they had shared, his presence there before her, none of it felt real, as though they were merely filling in time until the inevitable confrontation with reality. Herr Dallas turned to face her with a melancholy sigh. The moment was approaching.
Ari, what is wrong, my love? You have been the same all day, so weary and cheerless. I understand you are likely still injured from my words last night, but... No, it's not that, she cut in, forestalling the unbearable contrition before she completely broke down. I just don't think I can do it anymore. Do what?
She shrugged dejectedly.
This us. You were right last night, I haven't accepted the loss of my wings, not truly. I have tried to continue on, earthbound, trying to heal the world around me while ignoring the pain I still feel inside, hoping that it will just fade over time. But it won't, and I just don't see how it can if I am with someone who thinks such things are to be accepted and celebrated and encouraged. I just think I need to be alone for a while, to figure things out by myself.
Herr Dallas was frowning, though it did not hide the suddenly panicked look to his eyes.
I am glad that have taken this step forward towards ridding yourself of your pain, but must we be apart for you to accomplish it? Please, Ari, not now when I am finally beginning to understand. I know I was recalcitrant before, but I would welcome your aid now if you will still give it, and I shall help you if I am able, and we can continue on together, that is, if you still wish to.
He crouched before her, fixing her with a piercing gaze to ask,
Do you love me?
She turned away, unable to stand the desperation to his eyes.
It's not that simple. No, Ari,
he countered firmly,
it is that simple. Tell me now, do you love me?
She stared back at him, past him to all the joys and the miseries those last few months had brought her. She could feel it inside her, that small grain of love, as bright and fierce as it had ever been. But it was crushed under the weight of the uncertainty and the poisonous jealousy and their endless quarreling over differences that would never be resolved. Even love ends, my dove, his voice echoed behind her eyes, and she just could not bear the thought of struggling on when she knew it was all due to come to nothing anyway, because how could it be otherwise when he believed in such things? Ari swallowed, tears spilling down her face, and told herself over and over it was not a lie as she whispered,
No.
Herr Dallas blinked slowly, an emptiness to his expression as he drew back from her to stand once more, and Ari dropped her face again, whispering fervently into her lap.
I'm sorry, Herr Dallas. I'm so sorry.
I see, he said eventually, his voice wavering and hoarse, lost in a way she had not heard before.
I must think on this. Please, excuse me.
And Ari did not raise her face again until she heard the door click shut. They stayed at the Myth Rest until the moon was high and the minstrels had played their last, the crowds of the tavern thinning as the band began to pack up and their own group had decided to leave as well. They were outside now, the windows of the inn behind them casting panes of warm yellow light across the terrace as they gathered there, making their farewells as the group parted ways, and Anomen let his attention drift to Fritha. The girl was stood slightly apart from the others on the narrow wall that ran along the edge of the terrace, seemingly transfixed by the arc of star-dusted sky above them, though she turned to him as he approached, stepping down from her perch with a smile.
Is everyone leaving now?
Well, yes, most are, though Simon has yet to admit defeat. He says he knows of a tavern over in the northwest of the city that makes the high boast of music until the dawn, though we do not have to attend, he added quickly, considering the girl may wish to end the night there as well.
No, I am happy to go, oh, unless you are tired,
she offered just as hastily.
No, I am fine, my Fritha,
he corrected, remembering Simon's lecture from earlier and feeling himself going red as the girl sent him a suspicious look, as though trying to work out why, after nigh on 3 months of pestering him to use her name, he had suddenly decided to heed her.
Fritha,
came a timid voice behind him, and he turned to see Elsenda. Her brother stood reassuringly behind her, the girl pink in the glow of the windows as she made to continue.
Fritha, Simon plans to move on to a tavern in the government district. Are you attending with him?
Fritha nodded, glancing briefly to Anomen before she answered.
Yes, I think so.
Elsenda immediately turning a pleading look on the man at her side.
Brother.
Dysfeld smiled kindly.
And I suppose you will now wish to attend as well, then? Why not? I've nothing pressing on tomorrow.
Elsenda smiled, she and Fritha moving away from them apace as Tristan and Marcin came to make their farewells.
Are you two heading off now then?
Dice felt confirmed, Tristan nodding, a frown creasing his tanned forehead.
Yes, why, aren't you? No, we plan to stay on for a bit.
Tristan looked surprised, eyes glancing back to rest for the briefest instant on Elsenda. The girl now stood with the Fritha on the wall, the pair smiling as they returned to her previous stargazing.
Oh, really? Ah, I might stay out for a touch longer too.
It was Marcine's turn to frown.
But you were only just this moment complaining about how tired
Anomen snorted, trying to hide it in a cough as Marcine sent Tristan a scowl, sullenly rubbing the spot where the elbow had caught his ribs, though any reproach was forestalled.
Come on, you lot,
shouted a voice beneath them. Simon already stood at the foot of the steps below them, Eric next to him and looking as though he was already beginning to regret not returning to the order when he had the chance. And the group finally parted ways, those who had yet to do so making their farewells and heading back to their homes or dormitories, while they, that stalwart few, as Simon had titled them, headed for the nearest bridge. Simon, of course, led the way, his fellow squires, William and Setter, either side of him, the three laughing and keeping up a constant stream of banter as they went. Eric was following them in a statelier manner with Tristan, Dice felt, and his young sister, Elsenda glancing back to send the girl next to Anomen a smile, he and Fritha bringing up the rear alone. Anomen looked to her too, Simon's most recent admonishments still haunting him, Fritha humming absently to herself as she swung her long skirts.
What are you doing, my lady?
She glanced to him, seemingly surprised. Sorry. Oh, nothing, just trying to delight in one of the
eternal joys. It's rare I get to wear anything like this, though my appreciation is not really coming tonight.
She sighed slightly, smoothing out her skirts and moving to button closed her long woolen jacket as a cool breeze stirred about them. Anomen smiled, recalling his surprise when she had first arrived looking fair and warm in the deep yellow gown.
Yes, I noticed you had dressed for the occasion.
She shrugged.
I thought it was worth it since we were dancing and I didn't want to shame you in front of your friends.
Anomen stumbled over his words in his haste to correct her.
Fritha, I would never be ashamed of you. You could have arrived in your chain for all I care on the matter.
Anomen felt his insides groan, that had not come out as he had wanted, but Fritha just laughed lightly anyway.
Calm down, Anomen, I was only teasing. To be honest, I was at the theater just in my tunic and my amber sash, but when I mentioned I was going dancing, Jenna wouldn't let me leave without insisting I borrow a dress from her. It's a touch too big but my sash hides it. Of course, my sash is not quite the right color, it's too similar in shade to the dress especially with my hair the color it is. I should have a nice light green one or something, but...
She trailed off, such matters hardly anything to fret over it seemed, Anomen hesitating a moment, his heart in his throat, before.
You look like an autumn leaf.
Fritha shot him an incredulous look and immediately burst out laughing.
You should drink wine more often, Anomen, it clearly does you good.
Don't, he said quietly, feeling foolish.
Don't laugh, I meant it kindly.
But the girl just beamed, slapping his arm heartily.
So did I, Anomen, so did I. And Jenna and the others seemed to think I look well enough. To be honest, I don't think Althea would have let me leave if she had not thought so. She spent the longest time fussing over my hair, and none too gently either.
Fritha added with a wince, moving a hand up to gingerly pat the back, and Anomen laughed, feeling more at ease as they returned to their familiar camaraderie.
You look very nice, Fritha, and I should have said so earlier, though I notice a certain ornament is made conspicuous by its absence.
He let his gaze flick pointedly down to where her sword was so often hanging at her hip, Fritha holding up her hands to forestall this lecture.
There was no way I was wearing a sword with a dress. But do not be too quick to judge, for not even Jahara should have any grounds to complain this evening. Higold, it seems as of your minds, for he got very fatherly when he found out I was leaving my sword in the dressing room and demanded Marcus and Davith walk me all the way to the promenade. And I am not entirely unarmed either, I've my dagger in my coat pocket, though if we meet any trouble you'll have to do the all fighting on your own, you understand. I'll just stand behind you and shout encouragements, because I can't risk spoiling Jenna's dress.
Anoman laughed and bowed his head.
As you would have it, my lady, I shall endeavor to serve.
She smiled, edging closer to him to make more room on the narrow street as a group of men passed them, no doubt headed for the promenade they had just left, the men laughing and calling to each other as they went.
Fritha.
They both halted at the voice, turning to the alleyway they had just passed. The dark shape of a man stood at its mouth. The stranger took another step forward, the lamplight falling on a tall pale man with an elegantly disheveled crop of black hair, and for one irrational moment Anoman feared the vampires had already arrived for their retribution, when Fritha's eyes fell upon him and her face seemed to light from within.
Aaron.
She breathed, taking a step towards the stranger, frowning as though she expected to be mistaken, a smile suddenly lighting her face when she realized she was not.
Gods, Ren!
She shrieked, flinging her arms round his neck, looking happier than Anoman had ever seen her, the man laughing as he patted her back affectionately, the pair still beaming as they parted, the stranger holding her shoulders as he looked her up and down.
Fritha, look at you, all dressed up, you look beautiful. Oh, never mind about that,
she dismissed with a laugh, her eyes still shining.
I thought you were keeping all your trading to waters around Waterdeep. Now the weather's turned. Well, we managed to sell all the cargo in the gate, so the captain wants to make one more run to Kalimport before the winter really sets in. That's wonderful. So, how long are you docked here? Ah, there's the catch. Only for tonight.
Fritha's face fell and Anoman felt his stomach follow.
Which is why I am here,
Aaron continued, clearly trying to cheer her.
I just visited the coronet in hopes that you would be there, but, of course, I was out of luck and I was just on my way back to the docks, when...
He trailed off, smiling down at her with a dazed disbelief as though he could not quite believe his good fortune.
But I can see you are already engaged and in far finer company than I can provide.
He added, at last stepping back from her to politely greet the crowd that had gathered.
Good evening, sirs,
he nodded to Elsenda.
Milady.
Fritha seemed to awake from a dream, the girl flustered and full of smiles.
Oh, where are my manners? Aaron, this is Sir Anoman, Sir Eric, Sir Tristan, Sir Dysfelt, and his sister, the Lady Elsenda. Ah, everyone, this is Aaron, an old friend of mine.
Murmurs of well met were cut short as a loud voice echoed back to them.
Come on, Eric!
Shouted Simon, the man, and his friends now at the end of the street and virtually out of sight.
What is the delay?
Aaron turned back to Fritha, eyes reluctant behind the smile.
Well, I should leave you to evening.
Fritha nodded, as one who was doing her best not to look utterly forlorn.
Oh, yes.
Anoman sighed inwardly, glad his own reluctance was not reflected in his voice.
You would be welcome to join us, of course.
Aaron frowned, but even that could not hide the hopeful cast to his eyes.
Oh, I should not want to impose. No, we would be glad to have you join our company, would we not?
Anoman assured, turning to get the agreement of someone who could actually put some sincerity behind the offer. He was in luck.
Why, yes,
enthused Dice felt amiably.
Any friend of the Lady Frith's?
Aaron smiled and nodded politely.
Well, I would be honored to accept then. Come,
said Eric,
we had better set off again before Simon tires of waiting and leaves us stranded.
And the group continued on, Fritha falling into step with Aaron looking delighted as they immediately set to catching up, Eric falling back to bring up the rear with Anomen, the paladin sighing deeply.
You are a saint? You are an idiot.
Anomen sighed tersely, letting his eyes take in the unfamiliar surroundings of a tavern he had not even known existed until that night, anything to spare him from having to look at Simon's face and seeing his own frustrations mirrored there. It was similar enough to the myth rest in decor, the only real difference being the group of minstrels that took up permanent residence there, the troupe currently playing a merry jig, much to the delight of the tavern's many patrons. The place was busy despite the hour and the rather remote location, set in a northwestern quarter of the city on the plateau that housed the majority of Athkatla's nobles, the tavern on one side of a grand piazza that Anomen knew was popular for its views over the harbor. The knight glanced back in time to see his friend shake his head despairingly.
Oh, Anomen, you are hopeless. You arrange this whole evening for her and when you finally seem to be opening up to the girl, you then decide to invite along a rival. Do not start at me with that, Simon. What was I supposed to do? Apart from being exceedingly impolite to have just sent him on his way, Fritha clearly wanted him here.
Simon sighed, but thankfully said no more, turning instead to cast a critical look over the man who had been the cause of this uproar. Aaron sat at a table with the rest of their company holding court, Fritha no less than glowing as he turned to speak to her. At his side, Simon sighed again, sending Anomen a painfully sympathetic look.
Do you know who he is yet? Merely an old friend of Fritha's. They met in Kendall Keep some years back and then more recently in the Coronet a month or so ago now.
Anomen turned back to the table, both Fritha and Dice felt beaming as the sailor managed to tempt a laugh from El Senda. Simon shook his head.
The man is a god. Come on, sulking over here won't help.
He continued, turning to head back to the others, Anomen having to bite his tongue against reminding the squire that it was he who had dragged him away from the table in the first place. They arrived to another round of laughter, Fritha still beaming as she glanced up to greet them.
Ah, Anomen and Simon, Aaron was just telling us the funniest story.
Anomen forced a smile.
So we gathered. Ah, it was not so droll.
The sailor dismissed easily, eyes flicking slyly to the girl next to him as he continued,
and I believe Fritha was about to regale us with the tale of how her last night about the city ended up with her feigning a sprained ankle so as to avoid a rather insistent suitor who was pressing her for a dance. Ren.
The table laughed as Fritha flushed scarlet and gently struck his arm in punishment, and Anomen almost winced. The pair sat so mildly side by side, teasing each other like brother and sister.
Do you spend many evenings about the city, m'lady?
Questioned William, still grinning.
I have been recently,
she answered evasively.
And how does this night compare? Well, it is quite a bit more civilized than I am used to.
The two squires shared a look, Sadur's dark eyes shining with this hint at mischief as he pressed.
And which do you prefer, my lady?
Fritha paused, smilingly slightly.
I've time for both.
William and Sadur laughed raucously, El Senda joining them though much more uncertainly. hiding the gesture behind her hand as though she was not sure whether she should be finding such things amusing.
"Well, shall we get another round of drinks in?"
asked Simon, his friend Satyr nodding once as he rose as well.
"Yes, what was it? A pitcher of the Sembian white and one of the mead? And we should get a flask of the warmed rice wine they serve here too." "Simon, go easy on that rice wine,"
Eric called after them.
"You never could hold your spirits."
"Of course," the squire assured him, waving a casual hand that served only to emphasize that this warning would be duly ignored. Eric frowned and clearly decided his place was at the bar as he rose hastily to follow the pair, Aaron smiling as he watched them leave.
"They could be brothers."
Dysfeld gave a genial bark of laughter.
"Ha! You are not the first to have commented on such. Simon certainly ignores him like he is family." "I hope you pay more heed to your brother, m'lady,"
Aaron teased the girl across from him, Elsenda laughing shyly, Tristan seemingly disgruntled by the scene.
"Ho, William!"
The table glanced up at this address, the squire himself standing, a smile suddenly lighting his face as he sent a wave to the large group of young men and women who were gathered about a cluster of tables next to the dance floor.
"Oh, it's Varen and Lee,"
William explained for the benefit of those still seated.
"They said they would be out tonight." "Squire Varen,"
repeated Elsenda, the girl turning in her chair to get a view of him as well.
"Yes, I believe you know his sister, do you not?" "Well, yes, if it is the same."
William smiled, taking her hesitance in his stride.
"Truly? Well, I can introduce you if you like." "Well,
Elsenda faltered, glancing to her brother, though it was not he who stepped in to her rescue.
"Come, my lady, I shall escort you, if you wish,"
came Tristan, the man already on his feet, holding an arm out to her and making the offer a little too insistent to be truly considered such, Elsenda looking flustered as she rose as well, muttering her thanks as she let the knight lead her after William. Dysfeld watched the three go, glancing back to the bar to where Simon and Satyr were clearly finding something amusing, Eric's face a picture of weary frustration as he shook his head.
"I think I will go and lend Eric some moral support,"
Dysfeld chuckled, rising as well to leave Anomen, Aaron, and Fritha alone at the table.
"So,"
began Fritha, turning to Aaron eagerly,
"were you docked for long in the gate?" "A couple of days, longer than the captain would have liked,"
the sailor laughed.
"A storm was moving down the coast from the north and it would have been too risky to put out until it had passed. It is a shame it could not have struck a little further south. I would have much preferred a few days trapped here. I would put in a quick prayer at the shrine to Umberlee, though I fear she would keep the seas calm just to spite me." "Then do,"
cried Fritha with all seriousness.
"I do not like to think of you sailing in bad weather."
Aaron sent her a kind smile.
Our ship is a fine one and our crew finer still, you need not worry, we have weathered far worse. In fact, it sounds as though it is I who should be worrying about you."
He frowned, Fritha drawing back looking somewhat uncertain until he continued with a grin,
"Guddying all over the city causing trouble, I hope you are keeping an eye on her,"
he added to Anomen with mock severity.
"As much as any man could,"
Anomen muttered in quiet reply, Fritha sending him a sunny smile as she laughed.
"Oh, Anomen isn't the one who has been leading me astray."
Aaron smiled, hooking a stray curl behind her ear with a familiarity that Anomen would not have dared to venture.
"I'm glad to hear it."
The pair shared a smile and Anomen was about to speak, no idea yet of what he would say, driven only by his need to interrupt the unbearable simple sincerity of it all, though he was saved the embarrassment. A shadow fell over the table as the maid appeared, a large pitcher in each hand, a glance behind confirming that Simon and Setter had been tempted over to the more lively grouping of tables with William and his friends. Eric and Dice felt caught in a more decorous discourse as they lingered together at the bar. Frithia nodded her thanks as the girl bobbed a curtsy, turning to the man at her side.
"You were drinking wine, were you not, Aaron?" "Oh, yes," he confirmed, she and him both reaching for the pitcher only to stop as they each saw the other, hesitating a moment before they shared a laugh. "Ren!"
Frithia scolded, gently batting his hand away and taking up the jug to fill first his, then Anomen's and finally her own cup. Anomen raised it instantly to his lips, glad for the solid distraction of it, the wine within pale as white vinegar and almost as sour, even for the Sembian grapes, Frithia coughing slightly as she drew that first sip.
"How is it?"
Anomen asked, the girl smiling as she admitted,
"A little sharp, but not to worry."
"Here," came Aaron, gently taking her cup to mix a little of the mead in with it.
"There, how do you like it now?"
"Much better," she said, smiling as she tasted it, though Anomen considered from her look she would have likely said the same had he just handed her poison.
"So, how was the gate?" "As pleasant as ever it is. The people are a whole lot friendlier now the threat of war has passed."
Anomen smiled, his eyes falling fondly onto the girl next to him.
"Yes, both Baldur's Gate and owe much to those heroes who risked their lives in order to expose the Iron Throne's treachery." Yes, I suppose that is so,"
Aaron agreed, clearly nonplussed as to why he was bringing such observances into the conversation. Frithia flushed pink, the girl suddenly fussing over topping up her cup, and Anomen could hardly believe it as he realized the girl must not have told the sailor anything of her part in the city's rescue.
"A war along the Sword Coast would have claimed many innocent lives,"
the knight continued, trying to make some justification for his words though his efforts were wasted.
"So where did you visit about the city?"
came Frithia abruptly, Aaron smiling lightly through his obvious confusion.
"Well, most of the men just found a nearby tavern for the duration, though a few snuck off to Madame Rosalind's salon to waste their coin in even great haste. By Joaquin, you would think they were allergic to the stuff, the rate at which they dispose of it. I stayed close to the ship though, the captain needed my help logging and distributing the cargo." "Oh, that's a shame. Though if you ever do manage to get to the salon and while there meet a man named Niklos."
Frithia paused to take another sip, her face dipped in the slyest hint at coy hesitation. A grin was slowly spreading across Aaron's face.
"Yes." "Then punch him in the nose from me, for he is surely owed it." "Frithia!"
the sailor exclaimed, roaring with laughter as the girl continued her tirade.
"Making me sit in that bloody cellar for 3 hours while he flirted with Imoen. Oh, and if Ertis is there with him, you can tell him I said hello," she added in mild afterthought.
"Oh Frithia," Aaron sighed, still grinning widely.
"Well, it seems my first trip to Rosalind's will likely be my last too, since I will be barred for brawling soon afterwards."
Frithia waved a dismissive hand.
That would be no loss, contrary to its scandalous reputation, is very dull, though I will admit it offers entertainments I probably couldn't appreciate."
Aaron laughed.
"I will have to take you about Waterdeep if you are ever in the city of Splendor holds many diversions. Perhaps we can get you the same reputation for carousing there, as you seem to have earned here. Oh, mind your elbow," he cautioned, catching her arm as she nearly placed it into a small puddle of mead that some careless hand had spilled on the table, the man producing a surprisingly clean handkerchief from his coat and not releasing her until he had deftly mopped up the last of it, Frithia laughing as she exclaimed, "Oh, thank goodness you noticed, this dress isn't mine." "Truly?" Does the owner know you've it on? Ren.
She laughed, though another interrupted her before the girl could make her retort, and the three turned to see William before them, others of their company already on the floor behind him.
My lady, will you come and join us in a dance? We are short on ladies.
Fritha rolled her eyes.
Well, since you put it so nicely.
And she excused herself with a smile, moving to join Elsenda as those milling about the dance floor took their places, forming two long rows. Fritha opposite a man and Nomen did not recognize as they made their opening obeisance. The dance was a lively one with many turns, Aaron smiling as he watched Fritha laugh and send him a wave on the second pass. So, began a Nomen, as much to draw the man's attention from her as break the awkward silence the girl had left them in.
Fritha mentioned you are first mate on a trading vessel.
Aaron nodded once, grinning genially.
Yes, that is so. The Callisto Rial's out of water deep. So that is where you make your home? Water deep. Well, I have lodgings there, though nothing permanent. I spend most of my time aboard ship. You must spend most of your life at sea,
a Nomen said, adding pointedly,
not the most stable of existences.
But the sailor merely nodded.
Yes, it can be difficult. But what of you, sir? I hear you are a knight of the Radiant Heart. Fritha is fortunate to have the services of one such as yourself in her company. Oh, well,
a Nomen faltered, not really sure what to say to such a statement, especially since he had done nothing so far but intimate at the man's shortfalls as a suitor. Aaron smiled slightly, as though he understood his confusion.
I know her life is more dangerous than she would have me believe, raising this sum for her friend's rescue. It is not something I am happy about, of course, but it is not something I am in a position to change either, and so I find I can merely be glad that if she must journey such a path, she has companions such as yourself to walk it with her.
Aaron turned back to the dance floor and a Nomen followed his gaze to where Fritha was dancing, the girl chatting brightly with her partner as they went.
She looks older than when we last met. Not in the face.
The sailor hastened to add, chuckling absently to himself.
She is still the prettiest girl in Athkatla. But something in her eyes has changed. Your search for her friend, it doesn't go well, does it? Ah, no,
a Nomen answered shortly, unaware how much of that Fritha had divulged to the sailor either.
She was made an offer of Imoen's retrieval by another group not long past, but the price was too high.
Aaron took a long drink of wine, shaking his head as he set the cup back on the table.
The gods are cruel.
The dissent was on his lips that very instant, years in the seminary and then the temple both instructing him in the strict philosophy that the gods were beyond the judgment of mere mortals, the reasons for their actions veiled and subtle, based on factors men could never hope to understand. But in that moment, a Nomen was not sure he believed it anyway. He sighed and took a long draught of the bitter wine.
Yes, they can be.
Fritha sent her partner, a man of William's acquaintance whom she did not know, a smile as he took her hand and led her in a turn. Truth be told, she had wanted to quit the floor after the last song, but her leaving was made awkward by the fact her doing so would have forced her partner to leave as well, and Fritha did not think it fair that her pleasure be a source of someone else's disappointment and stuck with it. Her patience finally was rewarded at the end of that song, a group of girls returning to their company from where they had been taking a turn of the room, and Fritha immediately excused herself, a voice calling out over the din the moment she set foot from the dance floor. Simon was sat with Sadur at a table of their own just to the edge of the floor, the man beckoning her across with a smile, his voice affectedly melodious as he called to her.
Sweet Fritha, prithee come here, m'lady, and grace us with your company.
Fritha felt the smile already pulling at her mouth, tripping over to their table and gathering up her skirts to bob a demure curtsy.
I come as you ask, gentle Simon."
The two squires roared with triumphant laughter that their game had been taken up, Simon turning to his friend to exclaim,
"Ha! I told you she was perfect, did I not?"
Satyr nodded, his teeth a flash of white against coffee-colored skin as he grinned.
"You did indeed."
Fritha smiled as well, sinking to the chair opposite them.
"Well, thank you both, though I think perfect might be stretching the truth a bit." "Nonsense," dismissed Simon, "we Lathandites strive for perfection in ourselves, so we know when we have found it in another."
Fritha laughed, feeling rather caught out by such earnest compliments. Salvanus had nothing on these two.
"Good grief, I can see you two being popular with the young ladies of this city."
"Ah, would that were true," sighed Simon dolefully. Satyr snorted.
"Speak for yourself."
Simon threw a camaraderie arm about his friend's shoulders and neatly cuffed the back of his head, the squire's other hand already about the tall narrow flask of rice wine that was on the tray before them and filling 3 of the 4 small porcelain cups it had arrived with.
"Come, Fritha, drink a toast with us. To bright dawns and new beginnings."
They emptied their cups in unison, Satyr catching up the flask as soon they were back on the table.
"To glorious quests and fair damsels."
Fritha laughed, the rice wine of the second toast warming all the way down to her stomach, the girl feeling rather giddy as she took the flask Satyr was proffering her and filled their waiting cups.
"To clear skies for the next 10 days,
she pledged to the rafters, the 3 laughing as they sank their wine.
"Oh,"
Simon faltered, the still upturned flask in his hand as he went to pour another round and barely got 1 cup filled.
"I'll go and fetch another flask in,"
offered Satyr, the man already on his feet, and Simon moved into his empty chair to close the gap between them.
"Goodness,"
Fritha sighed, fanning her flushed face with a hand,
"I really must slow down or poor Anoman will be carrying back to the coronet."
Simon grinned broadly.
"I am sure he would not mind such a task."
Fritha felt herself smiling, the image of it suddenly clear behind her eyes, Anoman hefting her in his arms, struggling to carry her deadweight as she lolled and groaned. "Anoman! Anoman, I think I'm going to be sick." Fritha started back to find her smile had widened to a grin, Simon watching her with an amused look.
"Yes. I think you are envisaging a different scenario as to me, Simon."
The squire laughed loudly.
"Ah, such blithely born expediency! You remind me so of Olivia." "Olivia?" "Yes, my sister." "Your sister,"
repeated Fritha, for a moment back in the myth rest as she continued,
"Yes, I heard the Lady Diorna mention you had sisters. What are they like?" "Well, Isabel is 15 and Olivia is just 13, but by far the more sensible of the pair. You'll have to meet them, they would adore you."
Fritha frowned slightly, the glint to Simon's eyes making her wonder at just why the girls would find her so appealing. She did not fancy adding corrupting the young to her current list of transgressions within the city and said so. Simon really laughed then.
"And who would bring such charges? My father is the worst of all of us. He hates the expectations placed upon him because he is of noble blood, all the unspoken rules telling him what he should do and say and where. He believes that if one acts always in goodness, one can never stray too far from the right path." "But don't the other nobles find him a bit, well, eccentric?"
asked Fritha, recalling the treatment Nalia had received for her similar stance. But Simon merely shrugged.
"Oh, I expect so, but he is the head of one of the oldest families in Athkatla, and one of the richest too, if you'll pardon my frankness. Things such as that count for a lot in the city of coin, and I suppose no one feels they're in a position to judge. My mother is of the same mind as he. She worships the Morning Lord as well, so she was thrilled when I followed her path and joined the order in his name. And my older brother, Gerard, is already married with a young son of his own and another on the way. They are always at our house so that my mother can dote on the blooming Furiha and my sisters can play with young Adris. Ha! Poor Gerard finds himself quite ignored. So, do you not have any family?
Simon questioned, and after describing the lively chaos of people that was his own household, Fritha could see why he found it strange.
No brothers and sisters to drive you to distraction.
Fritha smiled, deciding to take a more open-ended view on what counted as a sibling than the mere ties of parentage and blood.
No, none to speak of. Imoen was the closest thing I had to a sister, since we grew up together.
Simon looked suddenly pained, and she could see him silently berating himself for reminding her of it.
I am sure you will be reunited soon, Fritha. Yes, of course,
she nodded reassuringly, a silence swelling between them as Fritha racked her brains for something to say which would put him at ease, though the squire continued before she had chance.
So, you have known Master Aaron a long while now?
Fritha shook her head, unable to help but smile at the mention of her friend.
Not really, I suppose a short while over a long period would be more accurate. I was only with him for a few moments at most when I met him in Candlekeep and then for an evening when we met again more recently at the Coronet.
Simon was watching her with an unreadable look.
You seem very close for it. Do we? Some people just seem to have an affinity with each other, I suppose. I see the same in you and Eric, a shared link that comes from more than just the friendship that grows over time.
Simon smiled and nodded, usually reflective though the moment was lost as Satur appeared back from the bar, the man cursing under his breath as a flurry of revelers hurrying to the dance floor nearly caused him to drop his tray.
Ho, Satur, you're weaving well. Need to call it a night? Not on your life.
The man snorted, setting the tray down before them, 4 small cups and a tall glass bottle of clear liquid suddenly before her.
I can still drink you under the table. Something which I will now prove since that was their last batch of rice wine.
He glanced to Fritha with a smile.
Have you before tasted, my lady, the subtle delights of juniper spirit?
Fritha gave a great bark of laughter.
Indeed I have, and neither delight nor subtle would be words I could use to describe the following morning. Ah, hello Anomen!
She greeted as the man himself appeared behind her chair.
Have you come to talk some sense into these two?
He smiled slightly.
I would not even make the attempt, my lady. Oh, is Aaron not with you?
Fritha continued, noticing the man's absence and peering behind Anomen to find their table empty.
They were short on gentlemen who knew this dance. It is an old Water-Havian one apparently, and your friend volunteered himself as a partner,
Anomen explained as he drew out the seat next to her and Fritha turned to see Aaron dancing a complicated bransel with Elsenda, the girl surprisingly bold, head high and smiling, Tristan watching them from the edge of the floor with a sulky look.
I thought you would be up more often than you have been, Fritha,
came Simon, drawing her attention back to the table.
I was told you love to dance. I do, she assured with conviction. I suppose I just haven't my dancing shoes on tonight, literally now I think about it.
And there was a round of laughter as she drew up her skirts an inch to show them the battered sandals that adorned her feet.
Sweet sunrise, they must be freezing, exclaimed Simon. Your feet will likely need a dance soon, if only to thaw them out. Tell me, what is your favorite and I vow I shall find you one. Ah, that is easy, a waltz.
Satyr looked surprised.
A waltz, you say? I would have thought you would have liked something faster.
Fritha shook her head, smiling wistfully.
No, it is a waltz for me. Get the right tune and it's like you're dancing on a cloud.
Simon grinned.
Well, you would be hard-pressed get one in the taverns, but the order holds a ball every midsummer, you could always attend with a nomen here.
A nomen shot the squire a dark look, though Fritha hardly noticed, laughing as she was.
Oh yes, in an enormous gown with flowers in my hair and a good half-dozen attendants, I suppose.
She sent the squire a soft look.
I like the way you see me, Simon. Oh, excuse me.
She continued as the dance finally drew to a close, the girl rising to rejoin Aaron, who had now returned to their empty table. Simon sighed deeply and shook his head.
Oh, a nomen, she is lovely. Lovely and merry and so very sad at the same time. I should have just told her about the last midsummer ball where you and I had to go together because we had left it too late to find ladies to partner us. At least then she'd have laughed. I know I did,
quipped Satyr. But a nomen just ignored them, reaching forward to pour himself some juniper spirits merely for something to do.
I wish you would not keep forcing me at her so.
Simon snorted impatiently.
And I suppose it would be better to just sit over here with us and sulk about it, would it? Come on, man. She barely knows him, she said as much herself, he has no advantage over you.
A nomen turned back to the table behind him with a frown, Fritha beaming as she refilled Aaron's cup, her hand hovering over his as he held it out for her.
No, he has won.
Aaron smiled, raising his cup in toast to her as she finally set down the pitcher and retook her seat, the man drinking at least half of it in one healthy gulp.
Ah, that's better. I haven't had a jig that fast in a while. Well, Elsenda seemed to enjoy it. Yes, lovely girl, very light on her feet, certainly made me feel my age.
He huffed, Fritha laughing.
Oh, you're not so old.
Aaron downed the rest of his wine with a sigh and a grin.
No, I do not suppose I am. But be assured that I am honored that so fair a lady would compromise her virtue by sitting with me without her chaperone. Sorry.
She frowned, turning at his nod to see a nomen watching them, the man going back to his drink the instant she had turned to catch him staring.
Oh, a nomen.
She sighed to herself, adding as she turned back to Aaron,
he doesn't mean anything by it, he's just overprotective.
Though any further explanation of a nomen's behavior was cut short.
Will you come and partner me in a dance, my lady?
Called Satyr, the young man already on the floor, William, Tristan, Elsenda, and a few of the people of William's acquaintance all bustling about him as they took their partners for the reel that was already in its opening bars.
Ah, no, Satyr, not this one, I'm feeling a little tired,
she called back, the squire easily finding another willing girl to partner him, Fritha feeling Aaron's eyes on her as the dance began.
You know I'm beginning to wish I hadn't come.
Fritha turned to him, her eyebrows raised and a small smile pulling at her mouth, secure enough in his company to know he was joking.
Oh really? Yes, I should have just let us part ways and followed you here in secret, then I could have stolen you away for myself.
Fritha laughed warmly, turning slightly in her seat so she could better ignore the scowl a nomen was sending them.
And what makes you think you would have to steal me away?
Now it was Aaron's turn to laugh, a new intensity to his eyes as he leaned in and took her hand.
Why can't we? What?
He glanced hastily about them, half their group dancing while the rest were either watching or caught in talk. A no-man finally distracted, apparently trying to talk Simon out of another round of juniper spirits.
Come on!
And ARan was suddenly on his feet, grabbing her coat from the back of her chair and ushering her to the door, the man slipping out into the darkness beyond. Frithha hesitated at the threshold, and for a moment they stood, her in the noise and light of the tavern, him cloaked in deep blue shadows, the glow of the lamps bathing his face gold, and she could just see the beginnings of the lines where his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Somewhere behind her, a man's voice called her name, Eric perhaps, she wasn't sure. But in that instant, she made her decision, taking ARan's outstretched hand again and slipping through the door after him. It was another world out there, and Frithha felt pleasantly nervous, stood with him in the twilight, her skin pricking with the unaccustomed thrill as ARan placed her coat about her shoulders.
You're not cold, are you?
She smiled and shook her head, slipping her arms into the sleeves.
No, I'm fine.
ARan smiled as well, taking her arm as he led them across the small square, past the arrangement of fountains and ornamental trees to the low wall that bordered the edge of the escarpment, the lights of homes and taverns both stretching down to the harbor far below them, the sea shimmering in the moonlight.
Here, wait a moment,
he said softly as she went to sit, stopping her until he had laid his coat over the cold stone. And there they sat in the darkness, the din of the tavern they had left just a murmur on the breeze behind them. Frithha had half wondered, almost worried, what ARan would perhaps expect once he had got her out there, but as it was he made no move towards her, and there was a calmness to the air as they sat staring out at the moonlit sea, their legs just touching. Down in the harbor, the dark silhouette of a sail could be seen making its way towards the horizon as it headed for open water, and Frithha absently watched its progress until ARan caught her eye.
Tempted?
He grinned.
Sorry. There are plenty of boats moored down there, it wouldn't be too difficult to acquire one to make our escape. Our escape?
She repeated with a laugh.
And where would you sail me to? Everywhere!
He exclaimed with an expansive gesture that ended with an arm being draped causally over her shoulders.
Halruaa, Damara, the far-off Isles of Wa.
Frithha smiled, leaning into the embrace.
I don't think Damara has a coastline. And the Isles of Wa would be quicker to get to overland from here.
He grinned roguishly.
Not the way I sail.
She laughed at that, and he let her, waiting until she had quietened before continuing.
Yes, we three would sail the world. 3. Yes,
he answered, trying to hide his grin.
Every ship must have a ship's cat. Ours will be Samson.
Frithha paused, pretending to contemplate this deeply for a moment until nodding once.
Fair enough. You and I and, of course, Samson, will sail the world, as free as the sea and the sky. Then what? Well, when we have been everywhere and seen everything, we shall return here and you shall write plays of our journeys for that theatre of yours to perform, and every third 10-day, Samson and I shall sail to Kalimshan to return with silks and spices.
Frithha smiled, feeling a deep melancholy joy as she left herself imagine such a life.
That sounds lovely, ARan, I think I like it all the better for the impossibility of it.
The man next to her sighed.
Oh, how can so alive a girl be satisfied with such whisper-thin dreams? They are more filling than you would suspect, especially when there is nothing else to be had.
For a moment she thought her words had prompted it, though she realized immediately he had likely been thinking on it for a long time, his voice carefully careless as he began.
You know, I have quite a bit of leave owed to me. The captain is always very good about us taking it at short notice.
Fritha felt her heart wrench, the unspoken offer hanging in the air between them, and for a moment it was all she could do not to cry out, "Yes!" and grasp him and the much-longed-for life he was offering to her with both hands. But she could not be that person now, there was no time, no room for such gentle fragile weakness. He was just another thing to lose, and it seemed the closer she wanted Aaron, the further away she needed him to be.
"Very short notice, you sail in but an hour's time,"
she agreed with a wry laugh. But Aaron merely watched her, not in the slightest fooled by her levity, and she turned away with a sigh.
"Oh, Aaron, no. It's so kind of you, but you don't know what you're offering and I just can't, I mean, I tried before and, well..."
She trailed off, giving herself a moment to calm her emotions before she could continue firmly,
"This life I must lead, Ren, is not for me, and it is certainly not for you, and I feel better knowing only one of us has to live it."
Aaron sighed again, though he managed a faint smile for her all the same.
"I understand. Just remember, you will not be living so forever."
She nodded once, frightened she might cry if she tried to speak again, though he seemed to understand, his arm tightening around her shoulders for a brief embrace just as a voice somewhere behind them called out,
"Lady Fritha? Master Aaron."
They rose and walked back to the tavern together in silence, his arm still about her. Jahara paused at the corner, still cloaked in the shadows of the alley as she let her eyes scan the tavern front, deserted save for a couple of men who were slumped outside, though from the low rumble in the air she could tell it was still busy enough within. The northern quarter of the slums was rough even by the area's low standard, the grim locale hardly lessening her unease. The grimy windows were giving out just enough light to illuminate the area before the tavern, a narrow courtyard of cracked cobblestones ending after only a few yards, falling away to an overgrown bank which sloped straight down to the river, a rickety fence the only thing keeping the local drunks from a watery end. Jahara moved closer, the flowing water flecked with yellow in the lamplight, the same color and similar consistency to oil in the darkness, though she knew it looked little better in the daylight. A stiff breeze was blowing from downstream in fits and starts, the sign hung above the door squeaking as it swung back and forth. The Black Swan. Very appropriate, thought Jahara as she considered the murky water, she could not imagine anything remaining white in that soup. Footsteps behind her and she turned to see the one she had been waiting for, Dermond's lined worn face serious for what little she could see of it. The man stood, half cloaked in the shadows of the alleyway as she had been.
"Jahara, you came." "Of course,"
she answered as she moved to join him in the darkness.
"Your note said it was urgent."
Dermond sighed.
"Yes, though I do not know how much help it will be for you to know of it."
He fixed her with a grave look.
"Galvary knows Fritha went tomb robbing the other day."
Jahara gave a bark of cold laughter.
"By Sylvanus, if he means to lay that crime at her door, then he can charge me for it as well, I am just as guilty."
But the old harper merely frowned, looking pensive.
"Yes. I believe that is what worried Galvary, that the girl is corrupting you." "Corrupting? I've never heard anything so ridiculous. Fritha has done nothing but good since she arrived in this city. She even refused the vampires' offers of Imoen, she never had any intention of joining them." "That she tells you?"
Jahara drew back, his words striking at her very heart.
"Not you as well, Dermond." "Please, Jahara, I am just giving you a taste of what others will say."
She snorted, not bothering to hide her contempt.
"Others, you mean Galvary?"
Dermond sighed deeply, looking suddenly old.
"When are you going to understand, Jahara, he is on your side. You are both harpers, you fight for the same things. Yes, but on this.
Jahara shook her head.
You do not understand, none of you do, Fritha, she not like anyone else. If you could only meet her, you would see.
She trailed off as she realized the words that had just left her mouth. Jahara pressed her lips together, her voice barely a whisper as she asked,
Derman, what should I do? Do you trust the harpers?
Jahara tried to swallow, it was painful.
The harpers, yes, but Galvary.
Derman sighed again, tired and exasperated.
Galvary is a part of the harpers. And yes, he is young and hungry to prove himself, but, be assured he has done so for our cause time and time again.
The man sent her a stern look.
Jahara, do you trust me? Yes,
she answered without a moment's hesitation, glad there was something, at least, she was sure of. Derman stared back at her, the pride plain on his lined face.
Then let Galvary evaluate her. Let him come to see her as you do, and we can all stand together, side by side within the harper ranks once more.
The harpers. More than just a group, it was an ideal she had served for nearly all her adult life, and one that many people she was proud to call friends saw fit to join her in, that Khalid had once joined her in. Jahara fought down the last of her doubts and nodded once.
Very well, I will bring her.
A Noman stood watching the pair before him, just silhouettes in the lamplight of the huge schooner docked behind them, the couple unmindful of the bustle just yards away as the ship prepared to set sail. Her hair was down, Aaron sheathing his dagger and kissing the lock he had just stolen, Fritha giggling as she gave his arm a playful shove. Aaron's ship was sailing with the midnight tide, Fritha saying she wished to see him off, and their group had parted ways just before the docks, William and Setter heading back to the Order, while Tristan offered to escort Dysfelt, or more likely Elsenda, back to their estate, Anomen, Eric, and Simon accompanying Fritha and Aaron down to the quays. The sound of footsteps behind him as someone approached to stand at his side, Eric's profile sculpted and pale in the moonlight, as though his face was just an alabaster mask.
He favors her,
he said simply. Anomen nodded.
Yes. And she?
The knight shrugged.
Fritha maintains they are just friends, she would have no reason to lie about it,
he added, wondering just who he was hoping to convince. He knew all too well that how people honestly described their present circumstances was no indication of what they desired of them. Anomen sighed deeply, turning away from the pair and letting his eyes scan the line of dwellings and taverns behind them, looking shabby and sordid in the street lamps, the scatting of drunks and harlots milling about before them hardly helping with the image.
Where is Simon? Just on the steps talking to some sailors, I left them trying to teach him a hornpipe.
Anomen smiled in spite of himself.
He would be a better match for her.
It was Eric's turn to sigh.
Anomen.
But a bell ringing on the quays behind them cut him off. Anomen watched as Aaron closed the gap between the pair, the man placing a hand against her cheek as he leaned in to whisper something at her ear. Fritha was leaning into the touch, her fingers clutching the sleeve of his shirt as she nodded before they parted with a smile, Aaron moving off towards the large ship moored behind them, the man looking back to throw her a departing grin, before he turned to jog up the gangplank with the other stragglers and he was gone. Fritha stood staring into the darkness after him, her shoulders heaving with a sigh before she was walking back to them, smiling in a gentle way that made Anomen feel even worse.
Thank you both for waiting. Right, well, shall we head back then?
They made their way back up the steep terraced streets from the quayside, Simon drunkenly lamenting that he had not been able to find Fritha a waltz as he had vowed, and he led her in the dance all the way, girl laughing and trying to keep her footing as he swept her back and forth, singing enthusiastically. The four had reached the edge of the bridge district by now, their group halted and about to part ways, Anomen and Fritha continuing east to the slums, while Simon and Eric would take the southern road back to the temple district. Neither pair were getting very far at the moment though. Fritha leant back against the wall of an obliging house, trying to catch her breath as she giggled merrily. Simon stood before her, red-faced and laughing himself, Eric smiling through his exasperation as he tried to get his friend back to the order before the dawn.
"Come on, Simon, I've got archery instruction tomorrow morning." All right.
Simon turned back to Fritha, taking her hand and dipping a deep bow that almost ended with him face first in the gutter, the man just regaining his balance to sweep upright once more.
"My lady, you have made this night. Promise me, the next time we have a gathering you'll attend."
Fritha smiled, fanning at her flushed face with her free hand, her eyes sparkling.
"I promise, Simon."
The squire beamed, looking down on her fondly.
"Oh, such a treasure, you need to hurry up and marry her, Anomen, because if you don't, I will." "Simon!"
Anomen barked. Fritha lost to laughter once more as Eric finally lost patience with his friend.
"Come on, Simon. Gods, I'll wring Sadur's neck when I next see him."
He grabbed his friend's arm to half lead, half drag him along the street, the squire's voice echoing as he shouted back to them.
"Ask her, Anomen. Ask her. Oh, I've a dappled gelding, and a ship that sails the sea, but they're none so precious as my own sweetheart to me. Now some men call her Lucy and others Marie Claire, but to me she is sweet Fritha, the girl with the auburn hair."
Fritha's laughter finally calmed with a sigh as the men rounded the corner and Simon's song faded to leave the air still, the girl smiling warmly as she turned to Anomen.
"I think those lyrics might have undergone a slight revision." "Oh, Anomen, you're so lucky, your friends are wonderful."
Anomen had never actually thought about it before, but he supposed they were really.
"Ah well,"
she continued, pushing herself upright and absently straightening her sash,
"I suppose we should be returning as well. Do you mind if we walk along to the main bridge and return to the 5 flagons so I can change back into my clothes and sword?" "Your sword?"
he questioned as they fell into step.
"I thought you had decided Jahara had no grounds to complain."
Fritha sent him a wry smile.
"I don't think she does, but that does not mean she will agree with me."
Anomen laughed and the pair made their way to the inn in a silence that was at least comfortable even if it was more contemplative than he would have liked, Fritha seeming slightly pensive now Simon was no longer there to distract her. A stiff breeze was blowing in from the harbour, damp and brackish, and he could not help but noticed as she shivered under her coat.
"Are you cold, my lady?"
he asked, a hand already halfway to the clasp of his cloak, but Fritha just sent him an absent smile.
"No, I'm fine. Ah, and here we are."
Anomen glanced up, the 5 flagons before them, looking stout and welcoming and very much closed, not a lighted window to be seen over the whole building.
"The tavern looks to be shut,"
he provided unnecessarily, but Fritha remained unfazed.
"That's all right, I've a key to the stage door."
He followed her around the back of the inn, a set of stone steps leading down to a heavy iron door, the girl producing a large key from her coat pocket, placing it in the lock to turn it with some difficulty, though the door swung open without a sound. Inside it was dark, the light from the street lamps opening out a small narrow corridor, and he could just make out a set of steps before the shadows closed in. Fritha called her "Where light," turning back to him with a smile.
"I'll just be a moment."
He nodded and she left him in the doorway, the girl tripping quietly along the corridor to the backstage, though there was hardly any need for stealth. Only Higold and Mech actually resided at the theater, and even then their rooms were not there in the basement, the pair having permanent quarters in the inn above. The rest of the troupe had homes and lodgings about the city, and she realized she had never seen the theater so empty since that first night it had become hers. Frithha paused before the dressing room, the tables strewn with a confusion of make-ups and props, debris from the last rehearsal, everything holding an immediate air as though the actors had all just suddenly vanished. The place was eerie, now she was so used to it, full of people and bustle, but for all that she was glad everyone was already gone. Frithha unsure she could have borne having to face Jenna and the others just yet, having to chatter and giggle about Simon and her evening, all the while silent of the man they knew nothing of and the ache he had left her with. It had been bad enough on the docks, watching him fade into the darkness only to have to turn back and face the pitying expressions of the two knights. If it hadn't been for Simon, she did not know what she would have done, the squire's merry obliviousness making it all so much easier to ignore. Her clothes and belongings were in her office where she had left them, and she changed quickly, neatly folding Jenna's dress over the back of a chair in the dressing room where she would notice it when she arrived in the morning.
"There, all finished,"
Frithha called quietly, tripping back along the narrow corridor, a no-man turning back from where he had been gazing up at the sky.
"Thank you for waiting." "You are quite welcome, my lady."
She locked up once more and they made their back to the slums in silence, a no-man's attention still focused rather wistfully on the clouded sky above them, and he did not speak again until they were both stood on the darkened landing of the coronet, paused before her open doorway.
"Well, good night, Frithha,
a no-man faltered, for an instant frowning before the mild smile was back.
"Sleep well, my lady." "Yes, you too, a no-man."
She closed the door behind her, just leaning back against wood and letting the dark silence hang about her a moment before she finally felt able to break both, moving to across the room to light the lamp on her dresser. After such an evening it did not feel right to go to sleep straight away, to so readily consign it to the past, and although she knew that she was fighting a battle that had already been lost, and that the morning may well find her having wished she had been more prompt in getting to her bed, she stayed awake, pouring herself a little water as she got ready for sleep and moving ponderously through the routine, only half a mind on it as the rest of her dwelled upon him. Their ship would have left the harbor by now, and she pictured him busy, setting sails and trimming rigging ready for the voyage to Kalimport. Part of her wished she was occupied too, as she put out the light and slipped between the cool sheets, rather than there alone with only her thoughts for company. But she had realized long ago that wishes did very little, and with a sigh she settled down, shed a few tears, which she told herself came more as a result of too much wine and excitement than any real misery, and resigned herself to sleep. End of chapter.